rated S for spoilers. And also shitty game. And also stupid story. June 19th, and so it finally happened. The Last of Us Part 2 has finally been released, and a lot of people have been very excited for this date, but for different reasons. Now, prior to the leaks, I would say that people generally were pretty excited for The Last of Us 2. Sure, a big part of the community was also concerned that they'd mess it up, but that's understandable. The Last of Us Part 1 is by many considered to be a masterpiece, a really good game, and it ended on a high note. Especially in regards to the story, people loved The Last of Us Part 1. So whenever you have a game that in and of itself could basically be considered finished and is beloved by so many people, there's always going to be a big part of the community that's concerned you'll ruin the legacy of the first game whenever you try to expand on it and make a second one. And again, that's understandable. But overall, I'd still say that the community was mostly excited to get Part 2. But then, the leaks hit. And that split the community in two. Now, on the one hand, you had the folks that said, "Oh, you can't judge a game by just a few cutscenes. It's gonna be great, you don't even know." But, well, A, it wasn't just a few cutscenes, it was hours of gameplay and very major plot points being spoiled. And B, sometimes you don't need every tiny little detail to judge. Now, that is not to say that there wasn't a chance that even despite what was shown in the leaks, it could have been a good story. But it was unlikely to happen, and so the second part of the community was pretty upset, to put it mildly, because they saw it coming. They took the leaks for what they were, a butchering of the franchise. But the game wasn't out yet, so nobody could prove that it's actually good or it sucks. So flash forward a few days, what happens? Oh, IGN gives it a 10 out of 10? Who could have thought? And so the first part of the community was really happy.
"Oh, see, IGN gave it a 10 out of 10. I told you it's a masterpiece, you dumb idiot."
Well, yeah, IGN gives a major release a 10 out of 10. Who could have thought that would happen? I'm sure IGN would have had the guts to call the game out if it pulled some bullshit. Of course, the second part of the community, amongst which I count myself, wasn't satisfied with chill media outlet reviews. Because we knew even if the game sucks, they wouldn't dare to call it out. Because if they were to give a game like The Last of Us 2 a bad review score, then they'd be on Sony's shit list and they wouldn't get early review copies anymore. And early review copies equals money. Because who cares about integrity? Who gives a shit about doing their actual job and delivering an honest review? No, that doesn't matter. What matters is that sweet cash money and keeping relations with big publishers alive. And that's why you cannot trust media outlets with reviews of big releases. Because they can't afford to ruin their relationship with that company. And if the game pushes some woke agenda, well, guess what? That's an immediate 3 point plus at least. And if you don't agree with that, then you're a bigot, a homophobe, a misogynist. And you know what? You're racist too. Because it doesn't matter if an agenda is just shoehorned in and doesn't add value to the game. As long as it's woke and panders to the social justice warriors, that's all we need, right? And so that's why we were excited for the release date. Because finally, we could get reviews by actual users that would dare to call the game out. And that we did. And oh boy, it's not looking good at all. So let's take a look at some of these reviews. Let's see what Metacritic has to say. Now, critical reviews are sitting at a comfortable 95%. What a masterpiece this game is. Whereas user scores sit at an uncomfortable 3.3. What a piece of shit this game is. Now, if we take a closer look at some individual reviews, we can see a lot of scores of 100 on the critical side. Are you kidding me? 100? How often do you give out 100? A game would have to be absolutely flawless to give out 100. 1 to 100 is a stupid scale to begin with because one single point matters so little. But especially on a scale like that, it's even more stupid to give the full score. But we can see here 100, 100, 100, 100, and it's all fucking bullshit. The only ones with some balls here were IGN Japan that at least put it at a 70. Now let's look at the user reviews. We can see an overwhelming majority here being negative, and you know what? While I think 10 out of 10 is fucking bullshit, I also think it doesn't deserve a 0 out of 10. Because in terms of gameplay, from what I've seen so far, it still seems adequate. I don't think it should be a 0 out of 10. But it definitely isn't a 10 out of 10. This, for example. The score I think is a little unjustified, but at least the reasoning behind it makes sense. This game is not bad because of social justice warriors. This game has poor, contrived writing that is trying to prove a point. It is forced and unconvincing. Dumb decision making, unlikable characters, outdated gameplay, full of plot holes. I tried to enjoy this game regardless of all the bad reviews, but honestly could not force to trick myself. Seriously, no explanation needed for this low score. They ruined the franchise. And there it is. I guess the point that I wanna drive home in the end, besides the game being shitty, is that games always have a driving factor, and that is either the narrative/story or the gameplay. And obviously that is to varying degrees. There's good games that are basically interactive movies with very little gameplay. And then there's also games that have a ton of gameplay and barely any story, and they're still good. And there's games that strike a great mix between the two and they just make it work. There's no one way to a good game. Either can work. And The Last of Us Part 1 sure had a good mix, although I would argue that it was more narratively driven. And if narrative is your main driving factor, and you think you have to make a Part 2 for whatever fucking reason, oh, well, money, I guess, then you better get the narrative right. And if you're gonna go out of your way to make something that is controversial, then you better be prepared to do it in a way that makes sense. Because you can have an unpleasant story. Narratives that evoke negative emotions can still be good. But in this case, it isn't. Because the way this controversial story is structured relies on characters acting out of character. It relies on characters making stupid mistakes. They could have done something interesting with it, something original. But instead, it's just revenge, revenge, revenge. And in the end, we find out, oh, revenge, bad. Ellie lost her girlfriend. Ellie lost her fingers. What would have happened if... Bullshit. And pretty much all the leaks turned out to be true. In fact, it's even worse than we thought, because Joel dies earlier than we expected from the leaks. And the way he dies is so stupid. Remember when Joel was a smart character and had half a brain? When he wasn't easy to trust strangers and just waltz right into a setup? In Part 2, he's so easy to trust. He has no problem with following them into a room, with telling them where they live and who they are. That would never have happened in Part 1. How do we explain that regression in character from Part 1 to 2? When did he become such a fucking moron? It's a cheap and stupid way to kill a beloved character. People love Joel. If you're gonna kill one of our favorite characters, then at least do it in a way that's deserving of him. Don't suddenly make him out to be a fucking idiot just so you can kill him off in a gruesome and unceremonial way. Now, I'm sure there's gonna be a lot of people that will say it's still a great game, that will double down on their opinion, and you know what? There's probably a few people that actually genuinely enjoy this story, for whatever reason. But I can tell you that I think the narrative of the game is fucking garbage, and it cannot be salvaged by the gameplay. And one more point, because of how great Part 1 was, of course Part 2's still gonna sell well. I don't doubt that. But what I will say is that the sales figures will definitely be lower than they could have been if the story was actually any good. And they didn't try to make it super controversial and woke. So what about you? Did you already get the game? Did you decide not to get it after the leaks? Are you still thinking about it? Let me know what your reactions to the first actual reviews were. I'd love to hear them. And with all that being said, game's trash, This is Evolutionz signing out, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one.